Good morning, and welcome to today's webinar from Safri, looking at UK SRS or UK Sustainability Reporting Standards and the steps that your business should be taking to help you to prepare for these standards and the upcoming regulations as well. My name is Alistair Lowsby. I'm a Director of Sustainability here at Safri, and I'm joined by a couple of my brilliant specialist colleagues to help you to understand SRS in a bit more detail and to understand the actions that you should be taking over the next couple of months to prepare for these coming regulations. Whilst we're waiting for a few other people to join, I just wanted to run through these two quick housekeeping points. You'll see at the bottom of your screen there is a Q&A function. Please do put any comments or questions in there. We'll try and answer them either as we go along or in a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the slides. And anything we can't get to, we'll follow up with you afterwards as well. Finally, following this, we'll make sure that we share the full recording of the session and the slides. And we've got a few other bits of content and insights that we can share with you all as well, if that would be useful. In terms of today, though, our objective, I suppose, is to give you all the practical tools and the 5 steps that you need to get started on UK SRS, on the UK Sustainability Reporting Standards, and make sure that you are prepared for these coming regulations. To do so, I'm joined by my two brilliant colleagues, E and Charlotte, who are specialist sustainability experts here at Safri. They've got a wealth of knowledge across the sustainability agenda, across these and similar standards, both in the UK and around the world, to share those insights, share some of that experience, and help answer any questions that you might have. Before we jump into the detail, though, I want to take a couple of minutes just to remind us of the context of UK SRS. I appreciate some of you might not have joined previous sessions. This might be new for you, or you might not have given it a huge amount of thought since our last webinar a couple of months ago on UK SRS. So I want to start by taking you back 5 years to 2021 and to Glasgow, where the UK hosted COP26, that big international climate conference. And at COP26, it was announced the launch of what became known as ISSB, the International Sustainability Standards Board. It's an international group that was tasked with creating a global baseline of sustainability disclosures. In 2023, they then published their first output, which became known as IFRS S1 and S2. Ultimately, these were they were aiming to be the global baseline of sustainability disclosures. So S1 is looking at sustainability risks and issues more generally, and S2 is looking very specifically at the risks and opportunities associated with climate change on a business. To do so, as I say, they identify those risks and opportunities across the sustainability agenda. They're looking at governance, risk management, strategy, and then how companies are measuring and setting targets to improve their sustainability performance and to manage and mitigate those risks and opportunities. Over the last couple of years, then, the UK has sought to adopt those international IFRS S1 and S2 standards. And at the start of the year, the UK government published their UK SRS S1 and S2, which is the UK equivalent. And it's pretty much the same with 1 or 2 minor tweaks to make sure that it aligns with the UK context. But it's pretty much the same as the IFRS S1 and S2, which means the UK has joined some 35 other jurisdictions around the world in aligning their sustainability reporting standards with these global baseline. The UK government has made it clear that they want the country to be the global leader in sustainable finance. They want to make sure that investors have access to comparable, decision-useful information. That's the ambition behind these standards. So whilst they're voluntary at the moment, we're expecting them to become mandatory over the coming years. We've had one consultation from the FCA for what it means for listed companies and companies acting under the FCA's purview. And we're expecting another consultation soon on the impact on private companies through the Companies Act. So that's, I suppose, the context and how we've got here. And then just a quick sort of 2-minute canter through the standards themselves. So as I mentioned, there are these 2 parts of it, S1 and S2. S1 is looking at your general sustainability risks and issues. So what are the factors of sustainability that are relevant for you as a business? Maybe it's human rights, maybe it's climate change, maybe it's nature, maybe it's waste and circularity, the list goes on. And S2 is looking at climate change specifically and understanding the risks and opportunities associated with climate change for your business. Under those two standards, then the businesses are required to disclose in line with these four pillars. First, governance. So what are the processes, the controls, the procedures that are needed to monitor and to manage those risks and opportunities? Thinking boards, thinking your management for individuals, roles, or responsibilities within that space, and what are the mechanisms you've got in place to control that action. From a strategy perspective, this starts with identifying the material information on those risks and opportunities over different time horizons for your business and where proportionate across your value chain as well. And then also looking at financial impact analysis of those risks and opportunities and understanding and communicating how it has and how it will continue to impact your strategy and your business operations. The third pillar, risk management, is looking at the processes that you've got in place to identify, assess, process, and monitor your sustainability risks, and also how you're integrating those sustainability risks with the organization's overall risk management processes. And then finally, for the metrics and targets piece, this is about understanding sustainability performance of an entity. So how are the metrics being defined? Are they being validated by a third party? And how are they being calculated? And ultimately, for each of those sustainability risks and opportunities that you've identified, what progress are you being made? What are your targets? Where are you trying to get to? What baseline do you have? Do you have interim milestones behind it? What timelines are you putting in place to make sure that you're moving in the right direction and communicating it? That, I appreciate, is a sort of very quick canter through the standards, but I just wanted to make sure we're all on the same page. If you'd like any more information on the detail of the standards, please do let us know. We can share previous events or other bits of content that we have, or we can kind of talk it through as well. But today, though, I want to get much more practical, and I'm going to hand over to my colleague E to start talking through the actual steps that you need to take to get ready for SRS. E.
Thank you, Alistair. Hi, everyone. My name's Yi. And before we get into the nitty-gritty of what to do, let's get ourselves take a step back to understand what's the bigger picture here when we refer to UK SRS and also how to get ready for it. So the very first step, I think, is for us to identify what's the reason for you to adopt UK SRS. And depending on your size of your company and also where you operate, it can be different. Some companies might be looking at compliance only, where you just want to meet the regulatory or future regulatory requirements, whereas others might look at to use this standard as a facility tool for you to enable any actions around your sustainability strategy and also making the business decisions around it. So whichever direction that you're going, it can look at a bit different in terms of the actions and the extent of actions that you take over time to prepare for it. And who would be your main audience in this case? So if it's regulatory requirements, then of course regulators are your primary audience. But then when we take the ISSB's message from the standard alone, then we understand that UK SRS is aligning to the international ISSB standard that is addressing the investors and wider creditors' interest. Hence, our primary audience in this case would be investors and other lenders. And then how do we address those needs of those main audiences? In terms of the investors' view, I think investors right now are looking at how their portfolio companies or how their future targets will be demonstrating the resilience of their business model across time around sustainability issues. So the issue on resilience could be demonstrated through any risk mitigation. And again, it's really important to acknowledge that opportunity is another, on the opposite side, another driver for investors to look into in terms of can they connect the future growth of the company, of the business to grasp any opportunities financially that can hopefully demonstrate a commercial value through sustainability actions. And in terms of what need to happen before the UK SRS disclosure, I think in here we'll cover in a bit more detail in this session. So there's a lot of things that you can do to get ready to, while you wait for regulatory clarity, you can still have a lot of actions to plan out and implement in this case. And finally, the so what element. So what is really the essence of using SRS in this case, in terms of translating sustainability information into any business decisions that can help your future business growth and also potentially plan for any adjustments to your business model, and then trying to map out your risks and opportunities that may indicate additional actions or strategic directions that can be tailored to fit into your overall longer term growth agenda. So in terms of taking UK SRS readiness as a project, I think once the wider picture is clear, then you can start to clarify your vision in terms of how do you want to be in your sector amongst your peers, whether you want to be the leader of the sustainability agenda using UK SRS as a tool to demonstrate that, or if you're comfortable to just be a follower in this space that doesn't really require much more details as the ones that want to be the leader in the space. So taking this, once you are clear on your vision, I guess the next step is trying to go through the items that we'll be covering today and perform a formal gap analysis around the 5 key areas that we'll go into a bit more detail later, and then assess yourself against those 5 areas. If you're really into the reporting element of SRS, then you can perform a step-by-step and line-by-line gap analysis to identify any data gaps and also trying to shape up your roadmap to UK SRS in the end. So next, please. Thank you. So we have outlined a 5-step here in terms of how you can prepare to get ready for UK SRS reporting. It will start with the ownership, and then that forms part of the overall governance, which then dives into a bit more detail on skills and capabilities, and then lead into materiality assessment that identifies the most material sustainability topics around your sector and for your business. Finally, the underlying data, systems, and controls will be outlined a bit further with an example, because I think that will really underpin how information will be disclosed in the end, and also that underlying foundation of data, system, and controls will set up the overall quality of your data that can hopefully stand up to any external scrutiny. And finally, the integration of sustainability with your business strategy and with your future financial planning will be the essence, as I said, trying to commercialize sustainability information and trying to help you get the commercial value of it. And as you can see, the arrow goes back to ownership again. At this stage, the ownership will be further refined. So further ownership clarification might be needed when you identify certain future projects that need to happen. And then again, the cycle goes on around the same circle again. Right, thank you. Let's dive into the first step. So ownership. Why does ownership come first in this case? As we know, governance is one of the main pillars under UK SRS. And then what comes within governance is ownership is the center of good, robust governance for ESG or sustainability practice at companies. Sometimes it's quite easy for businesses to just assume ownership within a centralized ESG team or sustainability team, while it's also widely recognized on any people practicing sustainability in their organization. Ownership will really be spanned across different departments and business functions, where you have to work really closely with either procurement team, finance team, HR team, etc. So it can be a bit scattered. So without a clear ownership or accountability that's documented in your terms of references, it will be quite hard to push any project forward. So it's easy to get stalled when the projects are showing unclear ownership and accountability structure. And we also would expect ownership and accountability to be owned at different level of the organization. So that means at board level, there will be some senior buy-ins and also senior sponsorship around certain projects, which helps to facilitate and provide oversight for any sustainability initiatives. And then at the implementation stage, there should be ownership around management team and also people from the ground that really push everyday tasks and actions on any sustainability agenda. So the overall voice from the top should really be set and send a clear tone to the entire organization, as the corporate culture can be shaped up by the leadership team. And if there's visibility in the leadership team that owns and then really clearly communicates their priority around sustainability agenda, then that can push out the entire company to act more effectively around these topics. And as we all know, that investors and regulators do recognize that a good transition plan or good business plan should be owned and clearly accountable at different levels, especially at the top level. So any unclear ownership and unclear accountability at an organization might signal that the credibility of your sustainability claims might not be credible in the end. So at the UK SRS side, SRS does require a few disclosure requirements in terms of having appropriate documents in place to demonstrate the clear ownership and also policies and procedures that should be documented. But then there's also wider consideration on the nature of that ownership and accountability that should be really covered by capable people, and the wide range of skills that should be covered. It's really depending on the sector that you're operating in. So Charlotte will later on dive a bit deeper in terms of how to build capability and skills. And then as we know that different functions and business units are working together, in that case, the system integration is one of the special feature for sustainability related governance and ownership here. So any actions or procedures should be embedded across the business unit. So the integration should happen naturally rather than having a siloed action that is driven by a solely ESG focused team. And finally, the remuneration aspect of leadership should potentially help to send the signal to the entire workforce, as well as send the signal to the investors that sustainability will be tied into any senior leadership's personal financial interest. So if that is the case, then that make the agenda on sustainability more alive. And once people's personal interests are tied into sustainability performance of the company, then at that stage, you can tell the motive behind that and the actions required, and the effort and also the push for sustainability across the organization will be taken more seriously over time. So at the end, I want to just highlight that many organizations do have a lot of policies and they have written documents in place to demonstrate their good governance. However, without a clear ownership and accountable attitude across different levels, which can lead to poor culture, and then that can potentially lead to high likelihood of corporate failure when it comes to ESG and sustainability topics. Next, please.
Nice, thank you, E. So I'm going to talk through the skills and capabilities now, which is step 2 of our 5-step UK SRS readiness plan. And this is basically about identifying where there are gaps in skills so sustainability can be addressed properly and reporting can be supported effectively. So part of the governance pillar of UK SRS, like what E was mentioning, is about demonstrating the right mix of skills and competencies to support business decision making. So this doesn't necessarily mean that you have to hire a whole new team, but internal training or targeted external support can help with preparation. So I've got here a few useful starting points. So you could start by asking whether you have people who understand what sustainability means in your business context, and also whether you have people who understand the financial implications of sustainability related matters, because this is sort of the central part of UK SRS. That's a really key one. to make sure you have the skills in place for that. So on the right, I've got one practical tool to ensure sufficient skills coverage, and it's using a heat map to assess capabilities. So this map highlights existing skills across the business and it highlights the gaps. So they're the ones in red there. So the red areas show where more learning or support may be needed, which can then feed into a training plan through internal learning or external support, like I mentioned before. So, like I was saying, a key characteristic of UK SRS is assessing financial implications of sustainability-related matters. For companies that haven't previously produced a TCFD report, it's possible that there's a skills gap in relation to integrating financial impacts and sustainability-related matters. So, for example, identifying the topics that materially impact financial performance. So the last one there, I've got how climate risks might affect EBITDA. So for this reason, early action ahead of reporting is key because it allows time to address the upskilling that's needed to ensure effective outcomes. Because obviously getting the skills in place and the training and development can take some time. So it's worth sort of getting that in advance. So next up, I'm going to talk through materiality assessment, which is step 3 of our 5-step approach. So to work out what needs to be disclosed in a UK SRS report, organisations need a structured materiality assessment. So this provides a clear process for capturing the data and the reasoning behind decisions on what should be included in the report. And what gets reported depends on the materiality approach, and different reporting purposes use different approaches. So on screen, I've got 3 different materiality approaches that can be taken, and that's impact materiality on the left-hand side, which looks at impacts that the organisation has on the environment and the people. So it's looking at their positive and negative impacts. In the middle, we've got financial materiality, which is what UK SRS requires. And this looks at the impact of the environment and the people on the organisation itself. So it's looking at the financial risks and opportunities. And then on the right-hand side, we've got double materiality, which basically combines both impact and financial to look at impacts, risks, and opportunities. So yeah, as I said, UK SRS focuses on financial materiality in the middle. So this means the focus is on information that helps primary users, which is investors, lenders, and creditors, make resource allocation decisions because it has the potential to affect financial performance, position, or cash flows. So in this way, it's aligned with the concept of materiality in financial reporting, which might be more familiar to some of you, where information is material if leaving it out, getting it wrong, or obscuring it could influence the decisions of the report's users. So UK SRS doesn't prescribe an exact approach to take for the materiality assessment, so there's flexibility that can be taken. As Eve was mentioning before, some organisations might undertake a detailed assessment or approach that has interviews and stakeholder engagement, while others might start with a more streamlined exercise that just uses existing sector guidance and internal knowledge to identify a short list of potentially material issues. The important thing, though, is that the process is evidence-based and appropriate for the organisation. And obviously, over time, as there's more UK SRS reports produced, you can sort of adapt the process as you get more skills and data available. So the example that I'm going to run through here is just an approach that can be taken. And it's not a one-off exercise, but it should evolve over time. You can sort of revisit each step. So starting with step 1 on the left, which is scope. So this is about understanding your business context and defining the scope and boundary for disclosure. So this can be a significant exercise where a company has complex structures or value chains, and you should be clear on which entities and business activities are included or excluded, and understand the geographies and supply chain that underpin the operations. So once you've set the scope and you know, for example, which subsidiaries you're including or business activities, step 2 involves creating a risk universe or a long list of potentially material risks and opportunities that could be expected to affect your company's financials. So the depth of this step will depend on resources and capability. So as I was saying before, some organisations might undertake detailed stakeholder engagement, while others might use a more top-down approach with something like peer benchmarking or industry guidance. But again, the key is to use all reasonable and supportable information available, and over time you can adapt this approach where needed. So after you have sort of the whole risk universe or the long list of potential risks and opportunities. You want to assess the financial impacts of the long list against a materiality threshold. So UK SRS doesn't prescribe a set threshold, so this will involve internal judgment using both qualitative and quantitative information where it's available. For example, considering likelihood, magnitude, and potential impacts on cash flows, revenues, or other financial statement line items. And you want to consider this across time horizons, so short, medium, and long-term time horizons. So I think it's important to flag here that materiality isn't assessed necessarily based on what management personally think is important, but you really need to focus on what an investor thinks is important. So don't ask yourself, do we think it's important, but ask, would an investor want to know this information when making decisions about your business? For example, circularity might not be high on your organization's agenda today, but if it could affect costs and supply chains or even future growth, then investors might see it as material. And for that reason, it's something you would want to include in your report. So after you've done those 3 steps, you want to and you've got your list of material topics. This should be subject to management, validation, and review, and there should be challenge applied to key judgment. And also at this stage, internal audit or assurance can help sort of getting ready for when assurance becomes mandatory, because we don't know yet what the plans are there, but they can just sort of give you the green light that you're comfortable with the process and you've got the appropriate documentation in place. So the result, and I've got an example on the right-hand side there, should be a clearly defined list of material sustainability-related matters that could reasonably be expected to affect your company's financial performance, position, or future prospects. So yeah, the example on the right just shows how this could be presented in a UK SRS report. And this list you basically would want to then use to prioritize actions and resources going forward. So yeah, overall, the depth will vary depending on your objectives, and a well-performed materiality assessment can be quite a long process, and it can take sort of months, especially with the review process and the fact it's not, you sort of would want to revisit some steps as well. So it's worth factoring this into the reporting timetable early on.
Thank you, Charlotte. And when it comes to disclosures, I'm sure those of you who are involved in the financial reporting today would understand the importance of data, systems, and controls that should be in place ahead of any reporting. And that's the backbones of any disclosures in the end for the financial year. So if we take the financial reporting today, we can make the reference on how the direction of travel for sustainability reporting could be looking like and could be expected in the future. The trust we place on financial reporting today does not come by accident. So it has involved a lot of deliberate regulatory and standard setting in terms of making sure the consistency of definitions, methodologies, and the end result of disclosure in financial report. And financial reporting has been quite a good example of how corporate can collaborate across different functions and trying to capture all the relevant data for financial disclosures in the end, which we would hopefully get to the same stage for sustainability reporting, as the expectation is rising that the rigor placed on sustainability information today should move towards the financial reporting that we see. So overall, I think data systems and controls, if we use an example, then I will hopefully make that more alive for everyone on this call today. First of all, I think as the step 3 materiality assessment, Charlotte has identified circularity as an example topic for disclosure. In this case, what is the underlying data systems and controls that should be in place? First of all, the type of data to support circularity can be divided into 2 categories: resource inflow versus resource outflow. And each type of these data can potentially be owned or are captured by different teams within your business. So examples on procurement team might have the information on how much materials you buy for your operation. And then for the waste that's coming out from your operation could be potentially captured and owned by the production team. Hence that clarification of ownership, which I have re-emphasize now here again, is really important to identify the key owners and trying to make it clear that whoever owns the data should have good processes in place to monitor and collect those data. And in terms of the systems in this place, in the example that we demonstrated on the screen here, is we are trying to track the tons of plastic waste from productions that's going into landfill. So this data could potentially be coming from the bin level data collection that is captured by any smart bin sensors or any weighing systems. And these can potentially coming from different sites across the country or across the globe if your operation is international. And very often the data that's being captured could potentially be monitored and collected by third-party waste providers in this case. So frequent and regular check-ins with your third party to really make sure the data is consistent, and you should discuss with the third party waste providers to track any outliers or any anomalies that you identified throughout the period. So in order to make sure the completeness of these data and also the quality of these data being collected, it's quite crucial to have some controls and validation process implemented. So reconciliation between different source systems and the final report goes into management should potentially be a good control practice they can perform. At this stage, I think it's quite good to have an active conversation between the sustainability team and finance team, because finance has been through the whole controls and also reporting phases for financial data. So there's lessons that can be learned from finance team on what count as effective controls and validations. Version control, again, is an example on making sure the data quality is up to standard and it's capturing the latest version of the data. And again, separate duties that's assigned to data preparers versus the separate person to perform the review of the data will be quite important to ensure the quality and integrity of data underlying the data captured. So overall, these data can be captured and then feed into the metrics and targets section of the SRS. And then any governance related control practices can feed into the governance pillar of the UK SRS. And finally, when we move on to the step number 5, this is when things get really clocked in for your business case and trying to make sure your sustainability information are not just for the sake of reporting, but it actually means something for your business. And the essence of UK SRS is trying to make a greater connection between sustainability information and your financial reports. So taking an example on how extreme weather events that's causing disruptions to your own operation, which will potentially be induced by climate change. So that can potentially mean the operational disruption or supply chain disruption will be increasing across your operation. And then that could also potentially mean your current machines may be retired early because they are not up to the same energy standard that is being expected for a future energy efficient economy. So overall, these business implications can be translated into financial implications in your line items in your financial statement. That potentially means higher operating cost or reduced balance sheet asset value because of stranded asset in this case. And I think the final step here on how businesses are demonstrating their mitigation actions to manage their risks, and also the potential plan they have in place to capture any future growth opportunities associated with sustainability will be quite crucial to really capture the information needs for the investors and other lenders. And in this case, we are not only talking about the claims that you'll be making in your statement, but really showcase how your operational expenditure and also your capital expenditure will reflect any future changes in your strategy and any future actions that you will capture. So going through a quick example here ties into the circularity example that we have been mentioning. In the sustainability materiality assessment, we have identified circularity as a key risk for the business if they fail to incorporate circularity in the product design or across their production process and waste management process. They will be exposed to potentially higher price volatility across their supply chain, because if they are relying on a single virgin material supplier across their operation. And they might also face inefficiencies in their operation, as the machines are going to be retired early and they don't really meet the energy efficiency standard for the current market expectation. And the business could also be losing out on potential market that is growing in terms of their consciousness around environmental and social understandings. And then, as we all know, that legal implications could be heavy here. And there are a lot of upcoming regulations across the globe that is trying to address circular economy in this case. So therefore, if you are not up to date with your circularity principles in your operation, then potentially you could face fines across your production in relation to any legal costs. And all these business implications can be reflected into the line items in your financial statement. So UK SRS are asking for qualitative and also quantitative implication of your financials in relation to any of your sustainability risks and opportunities. So in this case, that means potentially you need to design a good financial model to capture how each sustainability information is going to affect your line items in your financial statement. The financial model will be backed up with assumptions and probably judgments that will be exercised by subject matter expertise. In that case, all those assumptions and judgment being made should be captured in a written form, trying to make the potential future audit process more smoother. And then finally, our business strategy in terms of capturing opportunities and reducing risks could really imply changes in the business model, or they can really invest heavily in any future revenue streams that captures circularity opportunities, such as bringing in reusing, recycling, and repairing services for their products in the future. And all these should really be captured through a detailed financial planning that is evidenced by your future budgeting and planning for like OPEX and CAPEX data points. So overall, this is a quick overview of the 5 steps that we have outlined. And these are the areas that you can dig into a bit more detail before your final disclosure for UK SRS. But any questions that we can take today, it will be good to.
Thank you very much, E, and thank you very much, Charlotte. It was really useful to bring this to life a little bit and to get a little bit of depth and some nice examples there as well. At the bottom of your screen is a Q&A function. Please do put any questions or comments or any clarification you'd like in there, and we'll try and get to as many as we can. We've had a couple in so far. The first one being how companies outside the scope of the SCA and their consultation should be thinking about UK SRS. E, I think you sort of touched on this in one of your earlier slides, but maybe you sort of quick summary. How do you think those that are outside of the scope of the FCA should be thinking about UK SRS?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a good question because you can take it from the overall risk perspective. If you are trying to manage your potential risks in the future around the legal risks, we are expecting the Companies Act to really incorporate, or we're expecting a consultation to incorporate UK SRS for larger businesses that's outside of FCA regulations. So that could potentially be a trigger for your action in this space. And again, from a different perspective on opportunities, if you are trying to have a conversation with investors and showcase any evidence-based opportunities around sustainability-related items, then UK SRS will be a good platform, a good tool for you to communicate that message to your investors. And as we all know that information disclosed should be integral and not really a marketing tool, but if it's an honest reflection of potential opportunities identified for your future investors, then it will be a good framework to think about and disclose any relevant information, regardless of your regulatory status.
Great. Thank you very much. I hope that answered your question. We've got a few more coming in now. So I suppose similar lines, when do you think that the SRS requirements will be start again? When do you think there'll be a consultation on implementing the SRS into the Companies Act? The short answer is we don't know for certain. Everything I've heard would suggest that they were aiming for the autumn. Clearly, there's a certain amount of turmoil in Whitehall at the moment and a bit of change. So I think we'll sort of watch this space. One of the other sort of inclinations that the government has given is that they might not do a pure consultation just on UK SRS, but they might wrap it into a broader consultation on modernisation of corporate governance standards and governance codes, in which case that might take slightly longer as well. So the short answer is we're not sure. I was hoping for and continue to hope for the autumn, but as he said, even if it's not sort of mandated through regulation, chances are, as we've seen in other countries around the world, it will become the de facto way of reporting sustainability information driven by lenders and investors and customers as well. And so there's definitely an opportunity for businesses to start being early adopters in this space. Another one for you, perhaps. Are there any recognized UK software or organizations that assist companies to help generate these reports to meet UK SRS standards? So what sort of tools and software is available for that?
There are quite a few solutions out there, I would say, but I'm not sure if we're in a place to make any recommendations at this stage. However, I think yeah, if you look, there will be a lot. But also, I think the message behind that is those tools and solutions are looking at capturing the reporting requirements line by line. But if you want to make sense of those information for your strategy and for your future decisions on which project to further invest in or to have any business activities that potentially can be crucial for your overall business growth associated with sustainability, then that will be a starting point for your disclosure, but also not the end game in this place. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And all I'd add to that is we're here to help as much as we can. So we work with a number of different sort of technology and software providers as well to bring to bear a bit of a sort of portfolio approach, depending on what the client needs. So if we can help you to talk that through in a bit more detail or think through which tools are available, please do let us know. We're very happy to have a conversation. Thank you. Interesting question here around assurance. So Charlotte, I think you sort of touched on assurance a little bit in this as well. So maybe Charlotte, but between you, what are the expectations from your perspective on assurance requirements aligned to all of sustainability disclosures, or maybe just the emissions piece first? Is there anything that we can share on that?
Yeah, well, I'd say so for now it's not mandatory for UK SRS, but if it's following sort of how the ISSB standards have been implemented in Australia, for example, it is probable that it will become mandatory over the coming years. So it's worth having the processes and the controls in place so that when assurance does come in, it sort of stands up to that. And also, just voluntary assurance can sort of increase the sort of reliance people can have on the data. So, for example, you mentioned emissions data. Say if there's an investor looking at your report and then you've got assurance over those numbers or other disclosures and they feel like they can sort of trust what you're reporting on, and they're more likely to have, I guess, more faith in what you're actually saying. So whilst it's not mandatory yet, there's a lot of benefits to having voluntary assurance or even just internal audit procedures to sort of get the controls in place ahead of mandatory assurance.
That's a very
Absolutely,
good
well
point.
said.
Yeah. And just echoing on that and also adding to Charlotte's point is assurance on sustainability data can potentially be a more nuanced and different process than financial assurance. So there are expectations on certain documentations, methodologies, assumptions to be written and to be documented across the entire operation. So very often companies find it quite useful to perform a test or pilot run of assurance without really getting into the formal assurance stage. So that process can help them to get ready for assurance. And if you're looking for more guidance or information around that, we are happy to have a chat later.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And it's also interesting to see what we can learn from other countries. So Australia is probably a year or two ahead of us with similar standards. It's interesting to see how assurance is starting to cascade through their market as well. So we can share some insights on that, if that would be useful. Right, a couple more questions then. So how can we get more information on this or miss previous calls? We'll make sure we send the recording of this and the slides out following, along with a few other links to other bits and pieces we put out there. But by all means, do just get it. Drop me a note on LinkedIn or by email, and we'll make sure we share the slides and recordings of previous events. And happy to talk all of that through as well, Nick. That would be useful. And then when will these standards be mandated? As we said, it sort of depends on the consultations. From an FCA perspective, the consultation from them is closed. So if your business is under their scope, we're expecting the results of that consultation over the next couple of months. But in all likelihood, it will be from the 1st of January next year, will be the start of that reporting season. But we're still waiting for complete confirmation on that from the FCA. If you comply with TCFD already, is this a big lift up? And how much of the existing TCFD risks identified can be used again? Or does a fresh materiality exercise need to be done? There's a great question there. I'll hand over to you. But for those who aren't familiar with TCFD, I appreciate there's a lot of jargons and acronyms in this. TCFD is the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. So it's essentially asking the questions, what are the risks and opportunities associated with climate change that will financially affect your business? So yes, these standards are sort of building on TCFD. So how much of a lift up is there, and how much of that information, that data, can just be copied across?
Oh, perfect question. I was hoping people who know about TCFD and already report on it. So TCFD can probably resemble the S2 part of the UK SRS standard. This is on climate-related expectations on risks and opportunities. And I think there are more nuances or requirements under UK SRS, even if it's on climate. There are prescribed reporting expectations around maybe more details on business resilience against different scenarios of climate change and how the financial impact is largely expected to be quantitative. And if you cannot provide quantitative analysis on the financial impact, then you should have really good rationales behind that and document your potential plans in place to really make the quantification happen in the future. And also, it's quite good to acknowledge the concept on proportionality in terms of if you don't have the skills or capabilities internally at the reporting date, it's still okay to disclose qualitative information, but you have to make that clear in your disclosure. And then for the S1 part, which is diving into a wilder range of sustainability topic that is not covered by TCFD, and this is potentially going to be a newer content that you should look into if you are reporting under UK SRS S1, and that can be ranging from anything apart from climate, including social, nature-related risks and opportunities, etc.
Lovely. Thank you very much. A couple of other questions coming in. Will Scope 3 reporting be expected across all 15 categories? I think the short answer is that at some point, yes, that's definitely the intention of the overall standards. But what we're expecting from the consultations will be, and we've seen this with the what's been released by the FCA so far, some sort of transition reliefs. And so there'll be a bit of a grace period around Scope 3 to start with. But the ambition behind ISSB is absolutely that all of Scope 3 will be required to be fully compliant with the standards over the coming years. But again, just to stress, we do need to wait until we get the final details of those consultations to confirm that.
Just also adding
yes, go on.
onto the Scope 3 question, I think the materiality topic will be the angle on materiality will also apply here in terms of what category is material for the investor when the investor look at your company in this sector. If it's a sector standard expectation that you should cover the category 1 or category 2, then yes, that will definitely be the case. Okay.
Brilliant. Thank you. And on materiality as well, we had another question come in. If there's a list of topics that companies can use for materiality assessment in the EU for their equivalent, there's something called the ESRS, which has got some examples of what those material topics would be. My understanding is that the UK SRS doesn't mandate a specific approach to materiality. And so to that extent, the short answer is no. SASB has got a globally recognized set of materiality topics, and that's usually a really good starting point. So SASB or ESRS. But again, the framework leaves it up to you as a business to work out what's most appropriate and proportionate for you as a business. And for some people, that would be using a shortlist like SASB and reviewing that and validating it, as Charlotte mentioned. For others, it will be taking a best practice approach and doing a full materiality assessment, maybe a double materiality assessment with internal and external stakeholder engagement as well.
Mm-hmm. And I also think that the content to be included in the UK SRS on materiality is really about financial materiality. So if some item is material as a impact, you will have a material impact on the outside world. But then if that item doesn't have a material impact on your own financials, then probably you can leave that out because that wouldn't really affect the business in a commercial way. But that's quite hard to think about if you have a impact on the outside, but they're not the equivalent impact internally. Okay.
Well, that's a nice example of my double materiality remains sort of best practice, even if it's above and beyond the standards. It's a really great way of identifying some of the kind of extra opportunities for business to create business value through sustainability. Another sort of quick one, and then I think we'll close with one slightly meatier question. Any indication as to the threshold likely to be applied to private companies to trigger the SRS reporting obligations in terms of turnover or number of employees? Again, the short answer is we're still waiting for the consultation to be sure. From what I've heard, and again, we're still waiting for the consultation. The two sort of indications, I suppose. The first is from the FCA, which has basically copied over the threshold for TCFD onto UK SRS. And so that's £500 million turnover, I believe, off the top of my head. Mm-hmm. And then the second indication is the government has previously said that they'd like to close the gap in reporting between private and listed companies to try and create more parity between the two groups. So I would expect that something along those lines will be the first wave of companies and first wave of thresholds, but we still have to wait, hopefully, to the autumn for that consultation as well. Final question then. Thank you for all of these questions. It's been really, really helpful. This might be one for you. Our impact report is currently used as brand advertising, careers, and bid material, as well as meeting requirements of sustainability requirements, and also is a GRI disclosure. How do you recommend companies to display this information in an engaging way? How do you envisage companies to format and display this information? I appreciate that's a big question around how you communicate some of these topics, how you communicate this data. What, in sort of 30 seconds, what are your headlines for best practice on sustainability reporting?
Right now, I think in this case, a separate reporting is generated, if I'm understanding it correctly. So that report will sit outside of the financial reporting package. But I think UK SRS is trying to move the really bridge the two together into a single report where you can see sustainability information on the in the narrative section or on the section that's on non-financial information versus have the same set of financial information with connections between the two. So as you said, GRI is a good starting point to really showcase you already are doing something around sustainability. And GRI probably will look at materiality from a different angle compared to the financial materiality angle. And I guess a lot of duplications can potentially be in place in terms of you already identified the topics that's relevant for you. And the next step would be really see how those topics are having commercial values to your business functions, business performances, and business growth and risk profile. And to hopefully make it more engaging, I think is really getting your entire organization get involved with the relevant teams and functions collecting those data and trying to make sure they understand the purpose or the difference in the purpose between a separate GRI-based advertising or marketing-based report versus a report that is to inform financial decisions, which should be compiled in a way that is supported by evidence and a lot of nuances in terms of data systems and controls in the background. And I think overall, if you are collecting data that can address both needs, it will be already a good starting point. So you don't have to duplicate your effort there. And once the data and systems are collected and in place, you can use it for multiple purpose. And yeah, I think
Brilliant.
that hopefully covers this question.
It does. Thank you so much. I'd also say as well, we're doing a bit of work for the client at the moment around what best practice looks like in terms of some sustainability reporting from a mandatory perspective and voluntary perspective. So thinking about stories and transparency, telling that data piece as well. So if you like any form of information, please do reach out, come and have a chat. I'm very happy to share some of those insights. We're nearly at time. So I just want to thank you all for joining us this morning. I hope you found it a hopefully enjoyable but useful webinar, getting into some of the key steps that companies need to take to prepare for and get started with the UK sustainability reporting standards. And I hope you found those 5 steps really useful. If you go away and do anything, please do these 2 things first. Set out what is your vision, what's your ambition for sustainability. Do you want to be a leader in your sector? Do you want to be a follower in your sector? Are you happy just to comply? And then given that, conduct a formal gap analysis against the 5 steps that E and Charlotte ran through and against the standards to help create a bit of a project plan. There is lots more insights and support from us here at Safri. Please do get in touch. We are here to help. We have other events that I've mentioned that we can share recordings to. We've got an illustrative report, a bit of a dummy report of what UK SRS S2 could look like to help you get your heads around what that actually means in practice and reality. Boardroom briefing, future events. We're running training courses for colleagues and clients as well to help you to get started yourself. And then for those who, like me, like listening to something when you're out on a dog walk, we've got a couple of podcasts on sustainability reporting as well that we can share links to. I think we're out of time, so I will stop there. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I hope it's useful. Please do let us know if you have any feedback or comments, or if you'd like to discuss anything further. Otherwise, Charlotte, thank you so much for your presentations this morning, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thank you very much.